In this video, we're going to be breaking down one hero to play for every single rank for every role. So if you don't know what characters that will help you climb out of elo hell as quickly as possible, then you come to the right place. So we're going to break it all down, but do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe and check me out in my description for private coaching, and let's jump into it. Now, the first ranks that we got to talk about is bronze and silver. There's a lot of overlap between these ranks, but the typical characteristics of these ranks are very low teamwork and cohesion. No one really understands the meta, nor do they play it, and you are going to often find players not doing their jobs, and you still have to win in spite of all those things. For DPS, I would suggest two characters. First off is Soldier 76 for two reasons: mobility and his ability to heal himself, which is going to be fantastic for having DPS Moiras running around in your games. And of course, if you're a relatively new player, Soldier 76 allows you to learn the game through a familiar context, aka a Call of Duty-esque context. On top of that, we got to talk about Torb. Torb has statistically some of the highest win rate in the lower elos of play, and you're going to bring a ton of value, not just from his turret, but the fact that you are much tankier than other DPS as well. Both these DPS are fantastic for this environment. Now, for the tanking role, I have two tanks. First off is Rein. Reinhardt is a phenomenal tank for the lower elos of play because he is the tank that heavily punishes positioning mistakes by the enemy. Simply being a threat that if you get into the effective range of enemies and you're allowed to beat on them, you're going to generate so much damage, so much ult charge, and carry fights. Oftentimes, enemies will not play safe enough to deny a Rein from closing in the gap. Next up is Roadhog, and while Roadhog can't one-shot quite anymore, oftentimes just being someone that can output a lot of damage, have a form of consistent CC or crowd control, and the ability to heal yourself is all you need to navigate through the bronze and silver rank. Now, for support, it's no surprise, but we have Moira as the only support that we suggest in the bronze to silver rank. While I think you can develop better on some other supports, purely winning, it's going to be this character, primarily because the mechanical skill is low enough that they're not going to be able to punish you for moving sporadically, taking isolated duels, punishing enemy divers, and while I understand that people might get mad at you for overly DPSing, keep in mind that you can do your job keeping players healed and keeping them away from that critical health and still find situations where you can get solo picks and do a ton of damage and have a ton of pick potential. With the combination of all these things, plus the fact that she's incredibly hard to punish because of her fade, she's a fantastic support to climb through and out of elo hell, quote unquote, bronze plus silver. Now, the next ranks that we got to talk about is gold plus plat. And these ranks, definitely people understand a little bit more about the different roles in Overwatch, the objective, strategy, ultimates. Everyone has a general understanding, but there are still a lot of gaps in mistakes, a lot of gaps in the meta. People aren't really adhering to it all that much. And there are tons of positional mistakes that you could take advantage of. And for the DPS roles, we have two. First suggestion is Ashe. Ashe is just a consistent damage output character, able to apply a ton of pressure to the enemy backline with dynamite, even if you're not hitting criticals. An amazing character to pocket with the Mercy. And of course, Bob is phenomenal as long as you set up that crossfire and put it in a position where it's going to take a ton of space by having clear and open lines of sight. Honestly, Ashe is probably one of the best hit scans in the game right now. Incredibly powerful, and I think this is a DPS that you could grind all the way from this rank to the higher ranks if you learn to master her. Now, the next DPS is going to be fundamentally different. I'm going to suggest Junkrat here. Junkrat is really powerful as a spatial denial character, capable of outputting a ton of damage into open space, simply punishing enemies for, well, existing. And of course, with the one-shot mind combo, squishies have to be incredibly afraid of you, and as long as you're conservative with your extra mind and you make sure that you don't get yourself caught without any corners or cover, Junkrat just simply living is going to output a ridiculous amount of damage. And do not sleep on the power of attire, especially if you navigate it around natural cover. You don't get too greedy with it. You can turn fights like crazy. Getting a one tap here into an ultimate kill there, you can turn fights like crazy. Now, next up, let's talk about the tanks. I have two suggestions. First off, we got to talk about Orisa. I think that Orisa is just really great as this ever-present threat that actually a lot of players play poorly into. You're going to find a lot of DPS players in gold and plat just try and kill you like crazy. And as long as you balance your cooldowns with a form of cover that you can leave behind if you're out of cooldowns, you're just not gonna die. Like, you're never gonna die. They're gonna waste all their time. You literally want them to focus you nonstop because you're never ever gonna die as long as you have your cooldowns up, and they're just gonna waste their entire time, all their damage, their entire kit, killing or trying to kill someone that is just impossible to kill, which is fantastic. In addition to that, the other tank that I would suggest is Junker Queen. Junker Queen is a great tank when you need to carry. If you're in one of those games where if you're just existing as Orisa and your team just keeps dying and getting rolled, Junker Queen often wants to push past the enemy tank and look for isolated brawls onto squishies, and you have the means to do so. You can get crazy amounts of damage in the backline, pull people out of position with your knife, although it is a little bit hard to learn, and as long as you wait for Kirkos to waste their Suzu, or there's no Kirko being played, which is more common in Gold and Plat, you're going to be able to get some crazy ultimates out with Junker Queen. I really think that this is one of the best carry tanks in the lower ranks, and I would highly suggest learning this character if you want to climb and you want to have that hard carry tank in your back pocket. Now, let's move on to the supports for Gold and Plat, and I got two suggestions. First off is Bap. He's kind of like the do-it-all character. He really can output a decent amount of damage. He can definitely burst heal his tanks and keep them alive. While his amplification matrix isn't the most fantastic ultimate or anything like that, it can be comboed pretty well with Ryan and some of the other tanks that are played around this rank. And I do think that immortality field is useful as long as you're not getting too greedy with it. You're not going to save like your entire team with it all the time, but just saving yourself or saving your tank is enough to make this ability worth it. Now, next up, I do got to talk about Mercy. I actually think that Mercy starts to become pretty good around this rank. You're not very likely to get punished because players aren't that good at pursuing and chasing down Mercy as long as you're a bit disciplined with your movement and not flying in for reses when there's a whole bunch of enemies around. Keep in mind that the majority of your time, you're going to want to be trying to find a pocket, someone you can enable, and damage boost them as much as you can get away with. It's not your job as Mercy to try to heal everyone up and keep everyone to the tippity top of health. You're just trying to prevent people's death with healing and trying to damage boost as much as you can get away with. But it's also your job as Mercy to find key opportunities to push a res through if it's needed to win the fight, or if it's better to let a person go. Don't just force res every single person that dies. It's a really easy way to get punished as a Mercy player. Now, let's move on to Diamond plus Masters. This is the rank where people get better mechanical skill. They do play the meta somewhat, and overall players are better with their ultimates, but still there are some gaps that people can take advantage of, specifically with positioning. Positioning is still not great around this rank, and there are characters that can definitely take advantage of it. Now, for the DPS role, we got to talk about Cassidy. I think that Cassidy is one of the best DPS right now. Really strong, outputs a ton of damage. He's one of the tanks that really wants to play behind a decent front line, so you got to keep in mind that playing Cassidy with dive tanks is going to be a bit hard. But if your team is playing poke tanks like Sigma or a brawl tank, then Cassidy is perfect as long as you make sure not to go for these crazy flanks that put you all in. While this might work every once in a while, realize that without a decent amount of movement and really no way to get out, as enemies become more disciplined and react faster to you, these flanks are just going to get you killed. Now, the other DPS I would actually suggest for you in this rank is Sojourn. Contrary to popular belief, this character is actually still really good even without a Mercy pocket. Sojourn has the capability to duel just about every DPS or squishy in the game, and the fact of the matter is, as long as you're disciplined with that slide, push out to aggressive angles, look for situations where you can get a pick off and leave your slide to slide away if you're in danger, you can put out a ridiculous amount of damage, get pickoffs, and win a million 1v1s in a row. Now, let's talk about the tank characters that I would suggest for Diamond plus Masters. I think that there's two. Diva is fantastic for a lot of the high ground maps like New Bonnie. Really good at not only contesting high grounds, but also very good against a lot of these really heavy hit scan compositions. Great against characters like Ashe, Widow, Hanzo, Cassidy, Ana. The list goes on and on. Diva's really good at shutting these characters down, and also Diva's one of the best ways, or rather one of the only ways as a tank to interact with things like Pharah Mercy, capable of killing these enemies if they fall too low, and at the very least denying a lot of their value and long distance spam by eating every other rocket so that there's not a lot of burst. Now, as far as the other tank that I would consider is Sigma. Sigma's just a great tank to have in your arsenal. Some maps really favor him. A lot of the payload maps are amazing for Sigma, and especially when we talk about sniper maps like Junkertown, Sigma is like the best tank you could be playing. Now, the key to Sigma is trying to distance yourself if at all possible and saving your cooldowns if an opponent's tank wants to get into your effective range. Don't just blow your rock from range. You need to make sure that you have it in case they close the gap, like trying to hit a Winston jumping in, Doomfist punching in, or a Ryan charging in. And if you waste your cooldowns and then they close the gap, you have no means to defend yourself because your effective range is far further than theirs are. Next up, we got to talk about the supports, and there's two supports I would really suggest in this rank tier. I think that Ana is really great. I mean, generally, Ana is good for a lot of ranks. However, with needed good mechanical skill and good positioning, she's hard to play, especially around divers that can punish you. Now, Ana is very similar to Sigma in that sense that we talked about, where if you're up against a composition that is more likely to jump you, dive you, and kill you by kind of coming after you, you want to be more conservative with your cooldowns because you're going to use them defensively. But if you're up against more long-distance compositions that are trying to poke you from afar, you can afford to be more aggressive with your cooldowns looking for plays. Now, the next character in the support category, I would say, is Brig. I think that Brig is actually really strong, heavily underrated as a bodyguard for characters like Ana and characters like Zen. Really strong also at defending against a dive. And on maps like Nubani, you put your Ana on the high ground, you put a Brig right next to her, and all of a sudden, any Winston or Diva that comes and wants to kill y'all, the Brig can protect the Ana, boop the enemies down, and really protect the core of your healing and a lot of your value that you get out of your team composition. Brig is just a phenomenal character that really puts a lot of pressure on many of these dive tanks, including Hammond, which is one of the best ones played right now, capable of consistently triggering Inspire. I would say Brig is one of the best anti-meta characters in the game right now. But let's move on to GM plus top 500. These are the best of the best characters that you could be playing. But a lot of these characters require a little bit of coordination or high levels of individual skill. For the DPS category, we have Widow. I mean, we all know the power of a one-tap and numbers advantage, and Widow just can create those opportunities. And as long as you're making sure to consistently distance away from enemies' effective range, take alternate angles and not peek that same angle multiple times, Widow can get pickoffs, can carry fights, and sky's the limit with this character. And of course, we got to talk about Tracer, who is my personal pick for the best DPS in the game right now in the right hands. You can absolutely farm enemy supports, put a ton of pressure on the best supports in the game right now, chasing down Kirikos, punishing Zens, killing Anas. And of course, you have a positive matchup against basically every single tank and DPS in the game. Most tanks can't interact with you all that much, and almost all DPS will lose to you if you set up the optimal engagement, which as Tracer, that's what you get to do with so much mobility. So yeah, Tracer's phenomenal. It's just about how good you are on the character. And next up, let's talk about the tanks. I think two tanks are amazing right now to carry. Ball is just one of the best. I mean, just seeing a crazy amount of pick rate and win rate right now. Once again, another character that can be pretty difficult to learn and master, but Ball can heavily pressure the enemy backline. You can displace enemies, apply point pressure on many maps, forcing the enemy tank to come and contest you. And most importantly, allows your team to play a lot more untraditional compositions that don't require nearly as much burst healing as others do, because Ball is very self-sufficient. So you can all of a sudden play something that provides a ton of utility like Brig Zen, because you don't need to heal up a Ball, because a Ball could just get all of his own heals. Or you can even play a dive composition with like a Far Mercy and then have another support like a Zen that doesn't need to heal the Ball either. And primarily the idea here is that Ball is someone that is not greedy for resources from your team, meaning that your team can utilize the resources or build a composition where the resources go elsewhere. And that's really, really strong and super underrated about Ball. On top of that, the other tank I would suggest is actually Doomfist. I think that Doomfist has actually good tank matchups against most of the tanking roster. A lot of his worst matchups, like Orisa and Hog, are a lot weaker right now in the top of the meta than they ever have been. So he actually has either even or good matchups against the majority of tanks. You have to play differently around each one of them, and I'm going to make a Doomfist guide in the future. But really, you have decent to favorable matchups against most of them, and you could adopt your playstyle into a pick-oriented assassin or someone that is just disruptive, depending on whether or not you're going up against a more static brawl comp or something that is trying to dive. Now, next up, let's talk from the supporting role. We got to talk about Kiriko. Of course, Kiriko's amazing, but the way in which you start to increase that win rate at this level is you have to see what you can get away with on this character. What type of off-angling plays can you make? How aggressive can you be and not get punished while still fulfilling the same roles that you need to help your team? Because just being a healbot Kiriko is not going to be enough when the other Kiriko is also providing offensive pressure, getting maybe pickoffs, and still doing the exact same thing as the healbot side as you are. Remember, outside of the healing that is actually saving your team, healing is not that important, and it's more important to be providing pressure to the team fight. Now, speaking of which, the number one support I would say right now at this level is Zenyatta. Zenyatta is a menace. Discord is a menace. When there's only one tank on both sides, putting the Discord on the enemy tank is applying so much pressure to them. Balls have to play super passive. Doomfist can die out of nowhere. Ryans can die. Freaking Sigmas will lose the poke war. I mean, as long as that is being applied constantly, not only is Zen himself applying so much extra damage, but really that Discord gives your tank such a favorable matchup in the tank. 1v1 is what I'm going to call it. And as long as you're just alive on Zen, you are probably going to be carrying that fight just by living. Now, if the enemy is playing something heavy dive, it can be hard to live, and that's why you can either be flexible on Zen, play him in certain compositions, or just position a lot different depending on what the enemy is playing. But he is undoubtedly one of the best, if not the best, supports right now. And we're seeing it right now in the top 500 leaderboards. We're seeing Zen's fill it up right now. And yeah, Discord is pretty damn powerful. And I think this is one of the best supports in the game to grind at GM and top 500. But this is my list for the best heroes to play at each and every rank. Let me know which heroes you agree or disagree with me down below. And let me know what video you want to see next. Smash the like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.